Hey guys, welcome to Yak in the Stacks, our podcast where we talk about things. We yak sometimes in the stacks and sometimes at home because, COVID has us all at home sometimes. I'm Hayden and I work at the main library on the 4th floor in level 4, making cool programs for you guys.
I'm Catherine O'Brien. I work at the main library as well, on the 4th floor as well, and I also make really cool programs for you guys.
I'm Natasha. I also work on the main library. I work on the 3rd and the 4th floor, and I'm a library assistant, so I help with cool programs on occasion.
Today we are talking about animation, which makes me so happy because it's one of my favorite things in the world. It's one of my favorite things ever. I was going to send you guys some stuff that you guys can see it and then we can talk about it, and then maybe we can put links in the description to these same things, because animation, even though it's fun to talk about, it is a very visual medium, so it kind of requires some visual aids sometimes. My favorite thing about animation, I think the reason why I get so into it, is because animation is a form of storytelling. So if you've ever read a book or listened to someone tell a story or been to a story time at a library, you have experienced the same thing that animation is trying to give you, which is hearing a story, feeling the emotions that go along with it. And animation is just a medium of telling that story. It means that you can have these crazy characters that move around in different ways, maybe ways that people don't move around in real life. You can have, Mickey Mouse kind of stretches and squishes a little bit as he moves, and it kind of gives you this impression of exaggerated movement that is sometimes happy and sometimes really intense and sometimes really sad, depending on what they do with it. And I just really love it really a lot. It's come a really long way since it first started. Animation started probably sometime in the 20s. I don't have exact numbers. I probably should have looked those up before I came in and did this, but that's okay. It started a very, very long time ago, and people kind of felt like it was kid stuff. Animation is very kid-friendly. It's bright, it's colorful, it's kind of people associated it with kids, and it would go in theaters because they didn't have VCRs and they didn't have DVD players, and streaming certainly wasn't a thing. These little cartoons would go at the end of movies sometimes in the theater, and then a man named Walt Disney came along and he said, I think I can make a whole movie and it can be animated the entire time for the whole movie. And everybody was like, Walt, you tripping. Walt, you can't do that, Walt. You can't make a whole movie. Parents won't care because only the kids will care. And you're gonna flop, dude. They had headlines that were like, this is Disney's greatest flop and it's gonna ruin him and he'll be financially ruined for the rest of ever. And he produced a movie called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And Snow White went to theaters and people loved it because it was animation in a very different way. It was very deep. It had an overarching story throughout the whole movie. The characters were animated in a way that flowed really, really well. They didn't look choppy or jumpy. They moved like people move. And people were so impressed that Walt made enough money that everyone still knows his name. He's a household name, almost 100 years later. And that is because he made enough money with Snow White to do everything else that he did. I mean, he had other financial issues, but that's beside the point. But his animation studio probably produces some of my favorite animation. I was really into anime as a teenager, and that also counts. It is animation, but it's done a lot differently a lot of the time. But Walt Disney is probably some of my favorite just because it flows so well. When people start making animation, when they go to start making a movie, they'll often start with a storyboard. So I know you guys probably know what a storyboard is. Most everybody knows what a storyboard is, but I was going to explain it just in case anybody didn't. A storyboard is like a comic that lets the guys who are going to do the actual movement of it and the people who do the voice work for it know what's happening in the story so they can continue on with it. So before you can do an animated short or movie or whatever, you start with kind of a comic book format. And I found one that looks to be from Peter Pan, just to kind of give an idea of what these used to look like, especially back in the day. And it's just sort of neat to me that you go from like a spoken story, like a spoken word story, because you could have someone narrate Peter Pan and it would still be a cool story, to like this comic book format where you can still tell what's happening and there's little words next to it, so it's like a comic book, to like these beautiful animations where the movement is so pretty and things can get so deep. I think a lot of people still associate animation with stuff for kids. They still associate it with really lighthearted stuff that doesn't get very deep, stuff that doesn't get very emotional. But I find that, especially with Disney, sometimes with anime, animation can be very emotional. There's a lot of animated movies and shows I've cried at, for sure, especially with Disney. Do y'all have favorite Disney movies?
My favorite Disney movie. That's a really hard one, but I gotta say probably Lilo and Stitch.
Oh, me too. Me too.
Very near and dear to my heart. Kind of embarrassing. I had a huge crush on Gantu from that movie, the big evil giant alien shark man. As a kid, I was just like, "Ooh, hey there!" Yeah, that's my fun fact.
I was so basic. I was like, David's so cute, because you remember the guy that Nani was kind of into. I was like, oh, he's so cute. He's a surfer boy.
Good guy too. He like took care of them, and like before they ever even dated.
And see, that's part of what I like so much about it, because that movie talks about the foster system and what it means for a sister to not be able to care for her sibling, and what it means, you know, the fact that they're trying to do all of this and without their parents. Nani's trying to get a job. Like, it may be about aliens and, you know, this kid, and it may be cute and fluffy on the surface, but when you really get into it, it's got some really deep emotional moments. There's a moment in that movie where the social worker has decided he's going to take her out of the house, and he puts her in the back of the car. And Nani's like screaming about how he can't do that and she needs her. And it's a really impactful moment. And it kind of is one of the things that floats around in my head when I hear people be like, oh, well, cartoons are for kids. Because you really feel it.
Specifically like Lilo and Stitch, I think it also brings to light a lot of the issues of caring for a kid who is obviously, like, Lilo is obviously neurodivergent. You know, she is peculiar and she has a hard time socializing, and she's a quote unquote difficult child, and Nani is like, I need to be there for her because other people don't get it. You know, other people don't understand the way you have to talk to her and the way you have to interact with her. And Lilo feeling like everyone resents her for that, but then coming to understand that, like, it's something that is special and important about her. And not to bring this back to our first episode of Yaks and the Stacks, but I think it's a great way of like using aliens and like crazy situations like that to really bring out the humanity in like people and like all that. And I like Lilo and Stitch. It's a good movie.
I thought it was really cool, that movie, that in addition to the whole like foster care system situation that they talked about and how important that is, and I was going to say, you know, when that scene happens where the social worker is like, I'm going to take her out of the house, for a child to see that in a movie, in an animated movie that like is already close to their heart and they feel like they can relate to, first of all, that's huge for them to be able to be like, this is something that happened to me, or this is a situation that I've been in, would be hugely like validating for them and make them feel very seen. And like, I'm all about like people who are not seen a lot being seen. It really touches on like mental health too. And I liked that Natasha said that, because I was thinking that exact same thing. Like, obviously Lilo's dealing with a lot of mental health stuff. I think they like lightly touch on depression. One of the lines is like, leave me here to die kind of thing, which like is funny in the moment, but like also I think that there's more to that behind the scenes, or, you know, underneath the surface kind of. Just to be extremely basic about my favorite Disney movie, it is very basic, but I have to say it's The Little Mermaid, only because I watched it over and over when I was a kid and I was obsessed with the television show. Do you guys remember there was like a TV show about The Little Mermaid? Loved the TV show so much.
You guys remember the episode of The Little Mermaid show where there was a mermaid who was deaf and she had like an octopus that was like her interpreter? I remember that. Like, she would sign and the octopus would, I think it was an octopus. I feel like it was an octopus. That always kind of stuck with me.
I saw about that on Tumblr. People were talking about how good it was, that it was really good representation because she used real sign. They didn't fake it. She used actual American Sign Language, and that was really good for representation back then.
Oh, thank you for making me not feel so basic for choosing that as my favorite one.
It's a really good movie. I love it.
I have a clip of Pencil Test from The Little Mermaid. It kind of just shows, because you can start to see each frame, and that's probably more than 100 frames right there, maybe not quite, but it looks like it's a lot, and you can kind of see how much effort goes into every single second of making that movement so dynamic. I just thought that's cool.
Oh yeah, no, it's super awesome. I remember an episode, speaking of like the Little Mermaid shows that I remember the most, is like, I remember this episode where Ariel, she's like at the edge of this big, not a cave, but it's just like a big giant ditch in the ocean, like a big crevice. Is that the right word? I don't even know. But it's like a big thing, like a big crack
I know what you mean, like a big ravine, maybe?
Anyway, she sees something sparkly and she goes down there, and Flounder is like, your dad said don't go down there, but like you disobey him all the time, so like it's fine. And then she finds this bracelet and she puts the bracelet on, and then she can't get the bracelet off and she can't go home. And I remember being like, oh my God, how horrible would it be if I couldn't go home? That would be so horrible. And then it turns out that her dad's like, you can always come home. Anyway, I remember, to take it back to like animation, that particular episode, I can see it. Like I watched it probably a handful of times and I can see the whole episode in my mind. The way that they animated the bracelet down in this big ravine or whatever, it was just the best animation, how they did that sparkle in the dark. It just really was great. From an animated standpoint, it was really cool, I thought.
Yeah, I remember animated scenes a lot better than I remember live action scenes. So I remember watching Princess Bride when I was a kid 100 times. I must have seen that movie 100 times, but I can't remember a single scene from it. Can't remember. But I also watched maybe like The Lion King 100 times, and I can remember exactly what Simba's face looks like when he's trying to wake his dad up, or when they're doing Hakuna Matata, I think, and they're walking across the log, and it's the moonlight behind them, and it's showing Simba aging. I can remember that vividly. Those are vivid images in my mind, but I can't remember a single scene from The Princess Bride, and it was my favorite movie.
I really like film. I used to be a film nerd, and I think there are a lot of movies, every movie that I can think of that's live action, that has very memorable scenes to me, it's because the visual direction of the movie was very inspired by like art and comics and stuff like that. I think of Alien, my favorite movie. It has like a bunch of scenes just throughout the franchise that I really remember like exactly that moment. There's the scene in Aliens, the second one, where the girl is down in the water and one of the aliens rises up above her and gets silhouette behind her. That scene is like stuck in my head because it looks like a page in a comic book. But then like I think of movies that are just a bunch of stuff happening and like I can't really, I liked the movie. It'll be a good movie, perfectly fine. But like I couldn't remember any single shot or any single moment. I couldn't perfectly recall how it looks. But then like with animation, I think you can just be a lot more colorful, a lot more expressive. You can kind of push the limits of expression and all of that to just make something that's really memorable.
It reminds me of The Lion King. I went to see the new Lion King movie. I say new, but it's been like a year or two now. I went to see The Lion King in theaters at like this dinner theater in Little Rock somewhere. It was really fancy. It was a really good movie. It was objectively a good movie. It kept my attention. It had good plot. But I feel like they lost a lot of expression, keeping these animals on model to look real the whole time. They lost a lot of that really cool, like, Scar-looking evil because of the way his eyebrows were. Like, lions don't look like that. And that's kind of what they gained doing the 2D animation, is that lions don't look like that. So they could make them have these really deep expressions, really exaggerated expressions that brought a lot of emotion to the table. And I think it brings, for me, it brings it into question, what is the point of having it be animated versus having it be like a live action movie? Because when you take something like The Lion King, not to like rag on Disney, because I love some Disney, but when you take a movie like that the storyboard was originally for an animated movie, and you want to do basically shot for shot, turn it live action, what do you lose there? What is the point?
I have an idea. I think that what you lose is a level of empathy that is built with this character by the way that you recognize your own emotions in that character.
Especially when it's a movie about animals. There's a little bit of humanization that happens when you do 2D. So you do it 2D and you make their eyes have more bright color and look a little more human. You make their expressions, their mouth shapes a little more human. You start to be able to relate to that. Like, imagine if they tried to do the Brave Little Toaster live action.
That'd be hilarious.
We're not going to relate. We're not going to project onto those objects because they don't have those human qualities. But when they do it in 2D, they animate the way that the blanket twists around is in a more human shape. Like, we start to project onto these objects because the way they draw them is so, like, we relate to them.
You know the Snapchat filter with just the eyes and the mouth? That would be like what it would be like, just an actual toaster with just somebody's eyes and mouth on it.
I actually saw A diagram. A long time ago, I saw a diagram that was explaining the concept of Uncanny Valley. And it was a chart. It started off with the brave little toaster. And it was like, this is a cartoon toaster. It's got anthropomorphic features. It's just like eyes and a mouth on a cartoon toaster. It's cute. I can, understand that. And then like the next phase was, it's a toaster. It's a cartoon toaster. It has slightly more realistic eyes, and it's like a slightly more realistic toaster. I don't really like that much. And then like it shows the valley of like, this is a real toaster with real human eyes and a real human mouth, and I really don't like to look at it, and I hate it. And then it like goes back up, and it's just like, oh, this is just a normal toaster. Like it'll be like a picture of a normal toaster. I wonder if I can find that diagram.
If we can find it, we will link it in the description.
Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was the best Spider-Man movie ever. I say that like having seen every Spider-Man movie, the train wreck that is most Spider-Man movies. But I feel like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, beyond being the best Spider-Man movie, is one of the best superhero movies I've ever seen, full stop. Because there's so much about superheroes that lends itself better to animation than to live action. Because first of all, to me, no matter what, a man in a skin-tight spandex suit in real life is never going to look cool. He's just not going to look cool.
No, I'm going to report him is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, you can do whatever you want to Captain America or to Superman's outfit.
At the end of the day, it's a guy with his underwear on the outside. Like, that's what it is.
Yeah, it's not going to look cool to me. But when you animate it, I feel like seeing it in animation or in a comic, my disbelief is suspended a lot more, and I can believe oh yeah, he's got his underwear on the outside, but it's fine. He's a cartoon, it's fine. But it's not a real man. But beyond that, a lot of the effects and the movement and the way Peter Parker and Miles Morales moved in that movie was really cool, and it's something that you just can't do with real people. Real people can't move the way a cartoon can, and when you're trying to get across the point, in the case of Spider-Man, he has very uncanny agility, and the way he moves is it's supernatural. He's a superhero, it's not the way a normal human would move, but a normal human being an actor can't do that.
I feel like there's a huge difference between CGI. Okay, let's say we're filming a fight scene or something, okay? And you want Spider-Man to be able to move around crazy fast in weird ways, maybe his limbs kind of give a little bit of stretch, you know what I mean? This is all possible. And if you did that with a real person, an option that they do a lot of times is that they'll film these real people and have all of these CGI effects added to it to make it look like their actual human body is doing all these crazy stuff. And that's not the same. I feel like it just doesn't, like you said, your belief is not suspended. You're mostly just noticing how weird that looks. But if it's an animated character, you're that's not weird. My brain tells me it's just something that happens automatically.
The reason that a lot of these movies that are newly animated in CGI are bad or less enjoyable isn't because they're animated in 3D. It's because they do that thing where they film real spaces, or they film Africa and then they're okay, we're going to put a CGI lion.
Hey, there's real lion.
Yes.
You know that? There's real lions.
I don't think that it's the animation that's causing it to be kind of uncanny and kind of uncomfortable there. I think it's just the concept that it's not all animated. And so I wish that for the new Lion King, for instance, if they had stylized the lions just a touch more, just a little, give them real looking fur, but maybe stylize the faces a little bit so that it's less these are real lions, but they're also acting this way that is slightly less lion-like. This one's gonna sing now. It's a little uncanny, but you can do it in 3D. So I don't think they shouldn't have done it in 3D. I just think that it would have been cool if it was a little bit more stylized, and that way they could have gotten away with more expression there. For instance, Zootopia is completely animated, and it's beautiful and it's wonderful, and I love it so much.
Yes, love. Also love. Can't believe it didn't come to mind for one of my faves, because I will get down to Try Everything. Okay? By Shakira in my car. Literally, don't at me, mind your business. Okay? I'm enjoying my time.
I think Zootopia was a really pretty movie. I think it got a little confusing in its metaphors. The message was a little mixed to me. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really funny. And it, like you said, very expressive and pretty, and compare Zootopia to Cats.
Imagine Zootopia, but they had said, let's do real foxes and real rabbits. Like, let's make them look like real animals. Like, how creepy would that have been? How weird would it have been? And how much expression would they have lost? They would have lost so much emotion. Here's another GIF that I collected before we started here that has the numbers on the pages of the animation, and it is of Robin Hood. The old Robin Hood from 1971.
Oh man, this is one of my fave movies.
There's so much, even just in this 2 seconds, there's so much expression in his face. He kind of turns to the side and he smiles. And in that smile, there's so much human. Because even though he's a fox, and you can tell he's a fox, there's so much human expression there that is blended in with the animal expression that we really relate to him. And I mean, he's also anthropomorphic, so he walks on 2 legs and, you know, wears clothes and all of that good stuff. But we are able to see ourselves in him. And that's why we relate so hard to his struggles and want him to win. We root for Robin Hood in that movie. There are scenes where you think, oh no, Robin Hood, like, could be dead. Like, he could be gone. And then you root for him. You want to see him survive, and you want to see him do good, and you want to see him take from the rich to give to the poor.
You know, it makes me think of like archetypes too, because like here even you can see like, okay, this is a black and white image. We're going to put a link to in the description if we can, so that all of our listeners can see all of these awesome like attachments that we've put together. But I think it's really interesting in this clip, this GIF, just at first glance, it made me think of like, wow, I can tell that he's a good guy. Even if I never saw this movie. And like archetypes happen all the time in other movies and like live action movies and stuff like that. And for anyone who doesn't know, an archetype, I'm not really sure exactly how to describe it to you, but it's like basically the good guy wears white and the bad guy wears black. Just to like subconsciously tell you. And that's like a very broad generalization, keep in mind. But it's like to subconsciously tell you who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, kind of.
Yeah, Google defines it as a recurrent symbol or motif in literature, art, or mythology.
Awesome. Thank you. But you can look at this guy and like you would just get immediately that he's like a good guy because of just the way that it's drawn and the way he is. And animation does that. Yeah, it does it so easily. That's why I think part of watching animation is so enjoyable, because like your brain wants to take this in. Like it wants to know this information that it's getting subconsciously even sometimes.
And you can see next to Robin Hood the page count. So that is 67 separate drawings. And you get about a second, maybe 2 of solid animation. To follow up on your good guy analysis, here is a bad guy. And I actually already had him pulled up, so it's perfect. Here's some animation of a bad guy. It's Shere Khan from the Jungle Book. And you can tell in the way he moves and the way he's animated, even in just this 2 or 3 seconds, that he's the bad guy. He's sort of, the way he moves is a little bit more villainous. I don't even know how to describe it.
I mean, he moves in a way that makes him seem cocky or makes him seem full of himself, proud. Like he has the lines on his face. Like it's a big motif that like if somebody has like something over their face, it can be like a symbol for like a mask or like they're being sneaky or clever or something like that. The fact that he has like harsh lines is another thing. But then he also has, and like not to get like too crazy into like the archetype thing, that I love this. Okay, so he has this like white patch on his front, and that could like represent a facade that he puts on.
Ooh.
So he has this like white area on his front, then he has these harsh colors and harsh lines behind that. And that could be representative of the fact that he's fake. And in the movie, he pretends to be friends with like the snake, but he like beats up on the snake all the time. So anyway, I really love archetypes. I love watching things and like seeing things that like sometimes are probably even unintentional by the artist who drew that person.
Yeah, it's all about what you see in it. And animation lends itself well to that. It's to be interpreted by the viewer. And live action is too, to an extent, but it's easier to draw things from animation. Maybe you see it in a way that somebody else sees it differently, but you're both right. I love that about it.
Animation is a lot more deliberate because like and I mean, not to like rag on like an actor or whatever, because I think there's a lot of like deliberate action in acting and costuming and all that stuff. As someone who's very into film, that's something that I think about. And, you know, it's all very deliberate, you know, the art direction, blah, blah, blah. But I think like animation, every single part of every single scene is purposefully put there, and a lot of like live action stuff isn't really that same level of putting every scene under a microscope, you know. And so it's like sometimes you get movies, to bring it back to Spider-Verse, which is one of my favorite animated movies, if not my favorite animated movie of all time. Does it count? Marvel is Disney. I should have said that as my favorite Disney movie. And you know, there's discussion of 2D animation versus 3D animation, blah, blah, blah. Into the Spider-Verse, like every frame of that movie is just so visually dense. Like you could watch it 100 times and notice something new every time. But the way they have the characters move or act or react to their surroundings or things in the background, you know, just all that stuff. And it's just like, you can't really get that in live action movies. Like you can't have that level of just seamless visual density that you could have in animation. And I think that's just really cool. You can tell 20 stories at once in an animated movie, you know?
Yes. Yeah, I think that live action is good for this specific thing that I'm about to say in its own way. Because in a live action movie, you kind of, like from a director's standpoint, they like can set up the scene and tell the actors their motivation for the scene and tell the actors how they're meant to be feeling, like how their characters are meant to be feeling. But like at the end of the day, you've got to just kind of like roll with however that scene plays out. It's kind of out of your hands. Like you can't puppeteer exactly what those bodies do. But in animation, like you were saying, and I was thinking the exact same thing, you can tell 20 stories in one story because you have so much going on. A perfect example is like the whole Pixar thing. You know, you'll have like different characters in the background, like Nemo from Finding Nemo or Marlin or whatever his name is, the dad fish. He rides in a mind boat. You know what I mean? Like that's really cool. And I second that I think that it's like really neat. And I'm one of those people that like pays attention to that kind of stuff. I love to look in the background and see. And it's really cool to think somebody, I mean, maybe not so much anymore. It's done on computers. Those old movies, somebody sat there and drew all of that in there. And even now when it's on computers, that came from someone's mind. That was purposefully put there, which is mind blowing when you think about it like that.
A lot of 3D animated movies have hand-drawn storyboards and keyframes and test animation. Like you can find like Monsters University, for example. I remember seeing a bunch of pencil tests for whole scenes that they would animate it all out on paper. It's like a melding of both methods of animation. Tangled has a lot. You can find a lot of like pencil tests for Tangled. The Tangled animated series I've heard is very good as well. I haven't watched it. It looks very beautiful, but I haven't watched it.
What is?
The Tangled animated series.
There's an animated series?
Yeah, I've heard only good things about it.
It's supposed to be amazing.
Everyone I know who's watched it loves it just to bits and pieces, so.
I watched Tangled in theaters with the French foreign exchange student. It was so cool.
That's awesome.
I saw Tangled in theaters too. That was one of the first movies I saw in 3D. It's Tangled.
Ooh.
Really? I don't remember. It was one of the last ones I saw in theaters, which is sad.
I don't know if I can remember the last. When did I last go? Big Hero 6, maybe.
I don't think I've still seen Big Hero 6.
Oh, it's so underrated. It's so good.
I need to go watch it.
Last one I saw, I think, was Moana, the last, like, Disney princess movie.
I did see Moana in theaters.
Moana had me crying. Moana had me ugly crying.
Same. No, I just recently also watched The Incredibles. So, like, I recently watched The Incredibles for the first time, and that was so awesome. And I was like, I can't believe I never watched it. I loved that it was like set. That's another really amazingly animated movie that was like, when I saw it, I was like, this is stunning. This is so interesting. It was like set in the 20s or something, or the 50s. Is that right?
It was set in the 50s, and nobody knew that until the new one came out, because they do it so subtly that you really have to look for these context clues in the first one.
Yeah.
You don't know, like, there's nothing in there that makes you go, oh, this is 1959. You don't realize. You just watch the movie and you enjoy it, and then later somebody goes, hey, this movie looks like it's set in like the late 50s. And then you go, well, that can't be because and there's nothing in it that isn't in line with that necessarily. So then you go back and you're like, oh my god, I had no idea. It helps give you some of the context to the motivation for the characters, but it's something you probably noticed on a subconscious level without even realizing, because they were so good at putting those context clues in there.
My husband told me before I started watching it, which is sort of a cop-out, but he was like, we made a point to, when we were all kind of at home during this quarantine, we decided to like sit down and watch a lot of Disney movies. And so he was really excited about that one. I think that that probably is one of his favorites.
It's really good. I like the first one better than the second one, but I think the second one did a good job of like bringing that same energy, visual energy. It's like The Incredibles is actually used like in a lot of animation and art classes because it's such an incredible example of scene composition and movement and like all the stuff. It has so many just visually that movie is incredible and it still holds up. You know, watching it now, like I think they did a really good job with the sequel, bringing that same energy of like having these really incredible visual, I don't even know, like the composition and the movement and it looks like a comic book. It's really cool.
It felt like it was like every couple scenes you would have this, it was like a huge scene and you would just like, it almost felt like you were watching like a play. Is that crazy to say? Like it looked like it was a set almost, and things that you would, like you said, see in like a comic book or see in like it was just so like bright. The colors were really bright and vibrant and it was just like, whoa, this is a lot.
So a lot of people brag on new animation because, especially new cartoons, there's a whole lot of people who are like, well, cartoons are awful now, or cartoons are the best in the 90s and they're awful now. And I have counter arguments for that because I think it's stupid. I also watched a lot of cartoons in the 90s and in the very early 2000s, and I'm very fond of a lot of them. Kim Possible, American Dragon, Jake Long, really good stuff. But I also think that cartoons now are just as good or better. I think it comes from the fact that a lot of the people who are making cartoons now watched cartoons in the 90s, watched cartoons in the late 80s, when everybody's like, oh, they were so much better than. I think they're thinking like the Hey Arnold, Rugrats era, which was really good cartoons. But because those people watched those cartoons and sometimes felt like they lacked deep characters or deep story elements, now we have stuff like Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Heck yeah.
And Gravity Falls is a really good one. And Steven Universe and Adventure Time, where you're watching this cartoon and you're like, oh, this is pretty good. It's very cute. And then episode comes on and you're like, hey, that's really deep. I have emotions now. I'm like an adult and I'm feeling things about this children's television show. What should I do?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I just got done rewatching through Avatar and I was like, I've watched through it several times. I'm not going to lie. I'm not embarrassed. No shame. I own all of the box sets. It's fine. It's totally normal.
We all have our thing like that we're like that with.
I definitely hear what you're saying. And I also think that cartoons now are just as good, if not better, as well. And I think that a large portion of people think that they're not as good because they are not their 10-year-old self experiencing them. I feel like a lot of the people who are out there creating cartoons now are really good at like tapping into how they felt when they were 10 watching those cartoons, because not everyone can do that.
Yeah, there is a certain feeling I get when I watch Gravity Falls in particular, and it's one of my favorites. Like, I really enjoy it. There's this feeling I get like when I was maybe 11 and I would open up a really good book and I would read through this book and there would be this, maybe it's a mystery book and I don't know what's going to happen and the sun is coming up outside, but I'm still reading this book because I'm so excited to get through it. Or when me and my friends would go like exploring and we're kids and we're like in the woods behind somebody's house. And, you know, there's nothing out there. It's a half acre of wood. There's nothing. But we're like, okay, there are definitely things in this. And it's like, it was very real. You know, there are things in this forest and they're real and we can find them and solve the mystery and be kids and be excited and believe in things believe that the universe might be a little more complicated than we think. And it's kind of an exciting thought that maybe, you know, the truth is out there, kind of thing. And that's the feeling I get when I watch this show. And I have a feeling that Alex Hirsch, who made the show, remembers being that age and feeling that way, you know, going on adventures with friends, exploring like an abandoned building of some kind, exploring a field or something, having those emotions as a kid. I think he captures that really well in this show. And I think if you watch a few episodes, even the adults that I've shown it to, my friends who are 19 through 25 or 26, really also can feel that in the way that they do it. And I think that a lot of shows right now, we have a lot of varied emotional things like that. With Gravity Falls, it's that sense of mystery, that sense of what's out there. We got to go find it because it's going to be fun and exciting. We're going to be like mystery solvers. I think that in Steven Universe, it's a lot of even deeper, more like raw emotion. It's a lot of processing emotion, learning how to handle yourself in the world. It's like a coming of age story. Steven really, really grows from the first episode all the way to Steven Universe Future. He's a totally different character. Just like a kid might be a totally different person from the ages of 10 or 11 or 12 all the way up through 15 and 16. And I think it's really cool that we have shows now that portray that. Because back in the day, you had a cartoon character and that was it. Like, Charlie Brown is Charlie Brown is Charlie Brown all the way through. And that also serves a purpose. It's a good episodic content for you to just enjoy when your brain is fried from work. But I think it's also important, especially for the kids, to have deeper cartoons with deeper characters. Kids relate to Steven because they also sometimes feel like maybe the whole world is on their shoulders and maybe they don't know how to handle it. Maybe they're in a family who's a little bit different somehow. Steven has like 3 moms and a dad. Maybe they're in a family that does things different in that way, and so they can relate to him. Maybe they're having to deal with some really heavy stuff and they don't know how to handle it, and they can see him on screen not knowing how to handle it. And sometimes he messes up because he doesn't know how to handle it. He'll think, well, my mom is gone and I don't know how to handle that, so I'm going to act in this way. And it kind of messes things up for him, and he has to go back and be like, okay, well, how do I fix it? How do I act differently? How do I process this properly? Sometimes the adults in his life fail him. And I think that's really interesting and like really deep to see on screen there, because, you know, back sometimes in the 90s cartoons had that same thing, but especially back in the 80s, cartoons were like, here's Alvin. He looks like Alvin all the time. He wears his red sweater and it's funny. It's important for kids' television to have those deep emotions because kids go through that stuff. Kids experience these deep emotions. They have adults in their life not react in a way that helps them. They have big things happen that they don't know how to handle. They try to bite off more than they can chew. I mean, it's all things that kids go through, and it's really important to show that to them at that age.
I think I'm hearing what I'm thinking of as I'm listening to what you're saying is like representation. Like representation for so many people.
Oh, yeah.
Is so important. And like, I think now more than ever, you know, it's a huge step forward that we're having so much more representation of not only like kids being kids and messing up and having, you know, a tough time, because it's important. And we're kind of living in a time right now where it's finally becoming okay to have like problems. Like it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to like have, like you said, a family who's not normal. What even is normal? Just so everyone who's listening, I did air quotes, normal. But, you know, I feel like back in the 90s and these like classic cartoons that people refer to, Rugrats, for example, like we did see some, like they did go ahead and make like the Rugrats All Grown Up show, which I think was like a precursor. Like I think that was us moving into like watching characters grow and stuff like that. But what we were missing was that real life representation of like, what do you do when this X, Y, and Z happens?
Yeah.
And stuff like that. So I think that's, you know, you're absolutely right. I think it's huge that we're getting that. And like as a 27-year-old adult, watching these shows like Avatar: The Last Airbender, stuff like that, it still resonates with me. You know, you can still find storylines and things that are like reassuring. So I'm just like, I think it's great.
As someone who's LGBT, I was watching Steven Universe kind of as it was airing because, you know, I had work and other things going on in my life because I was an adult when the show came out. I would watch it, you know, it would air and then I would wait a couple of days and then I'd find it somewhere on the internet. And I remember to this day when they did the big reveal about Garnet. And they showed that Garnet is not 1 gem, but actually 2 gems. And they are essentially a lesbian couple. And that's the way they're portrayed on screen. They both use female pronouns, and they are portrayed as very in love in a very innocent and sweet way. Like you would in a cartoon if it was 2 heterosexual characters. They're just very, you know, innocently in love, and they do this song about it. Where the song is basically saying, I don't have to change the way I am because it makes you uncomfortable or because you don't like it. Kind of. The song is called Stronger Than You, and I recommend to listen to it if you haven't before because it is so good. It was my ringtone for like a year. And even though, you know, I know there's a lot more probably important representation in the show than this, but it really stuck with me. And it's probably kind of cliche at this point because a lot of people are like, oh, Garnet's like the ultimate representation. But it really stuck with me, the fact that I'm seeing this. Even as an adult, there's not a lot of solid representation on TV for these types of characters. So I saw this happen on screen and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe they did that. I can't believe they got away with it. And also, I felt so like pure. I was like, innocence. And it's like me. It's like I was at the time, like how I identified. I resonated with that. And it really struck me because as a child, I never, ever saw any inkling of any characters that were girls who looked to be in a relationship in a cartoon. Like, I also wasn't allowed to watch all the cartoons, so that might have been it. But I never saw anything like that. And I think that I would have loved Steven Universe as a kid. And I would have seen that and been like, oh, so that is okay. So that is the way that some people
I think
were.
it's so important, you know, for a show. Like, I remember when that episode aired, because I cried my eyes out, because I always just, you know, like you watch the whole thing in Steven Universe is that the aliens in the show, the Gems, they can fuse with one another to become another fusion. Like they become a new person when they fuse together. And the song "Stronger Than You" that Garnet sings, the whole point of it is she's like, the reason I'm so strong is because I'm made of the love between these two people, and that's you know, that's what makes me better than you, because I'm a creature made of love. And I'm like, oh my god. Like, I remember like listening to that and seeing that, and I'd never in my life seen a show for kids like A, have something like that, and then B, like have the message be like, this love is so pure and powerful and strong that it makes her stronger than everybody else. Like, that's really cool. And like, I just remember being so like affected by that, and like finding it so, and I think like so much stuff, like as I've kind of gone and more stuff has come out, even before that, you know, at the end of Legend of Korra, when Korra and Asami got together, that was like a huge moment for me too, because I'd never seen that. And, you know, like a lot of people are like, well, they just held hands, they didn't even kiss, they didn't even whatever, but like that was all they could get away with showing, you know, that to show that they had gotten together. And that was so incredible to me. Like, I had no idea. I didn't even think to expect that those two characters could, you know, I remember there were some scenes in like the last season that made me like, oh man, they totally have a crush on each other, but that's never going to happen because, you know, it's a Nickelodeon show and we're just not there yet. Society is just not there yet. And then as it turns out, we kind of were, because they got to hold hands at the end. And like in the comics that followed the series, like, you know, at the end, like it turns out they did get together and they like call each other their girlfriend in like the comics. And that's really cool.
You explained Stronger Than You so much better than I did.
I think about it a lot because I always get really emotional when I see, like I was talking to my sister about this the other day, because another show that I watched recently, and we talked about this a little bit a few weeks ago, another show I recently watched had a girl character show interest in another girl character, and that show is The Owl House. Very good show. I strongly recommend it. But the whole plot of that episode, and this is a bit of spoilers for The Owl House if you're planning on watching it, but the main character in that show is a girl named Luce, and she has made a friend named Amity over the course of the season. The first season, it started off Amity was kind of a bully, but then as the season goes, they become friends, and she's in this like other world where everything's magical, and there's going to be a party called Grom, which is like prom, but it's called Grom. And like she's really excited, but then she learns that like what Grom really is that there's like a monster underneath their school that every year somebody, the Grom king or queen, has to go down and fight it so that it doesn't like get out and cause problems for everybody. But the thing about the Grom monster is it takes the form of your greatest fear. And the girl Amity, she gets voted to be Grom Queen, but she really doesn't want to be Grom Queen because her fear is, she thinks it's really embarrassing. And like, so it's this whole thing where the episode pans out and all this stuff, and at the end you do see like Amity's fear, and it's like she had written a note asking somebody out to Grom, and the like creature turns into a person. You can't see like the features of the person, but it like takes the note and tears it in half and throws the pieces on the ground and like, rejects her. And then when the note unfurls and you see it later, you see that the note was written to Luce, the other girl. And like I remember like watching it and thinking like, oh my god, like she likes her, like she was gonna ask her out to Grub. Like I was like so emotional because it's like, and she was so scared of getting rejected by her. Like that was her biggest fear, was getting rejected by the girl that she liked. And like I just remember like watching it, I was like sitting there like crying. So I was like, I've never seen something like that. Like I've never seen something like that. And I think it's just so amazing that like I feel like every year we make a little bit more headway.
Yeah.
Like there's just a little bit more, you know, like you get, and I think it's really cool. Like, you know, I think you get some Netflix shows like She-Ra has a lesbian couple, and then Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beast has a gay couple of, you know, young characters that are, you know, like that. But then like you don't see that so much in like shows that air on TV. Like
yeah,
I was just about to say,
if they air on TV,
well,
they
even
censor it.
Exactly. Even if I was gonna say, you know, as I'm listening to you guys, I'm thinking like I'm just racking my brain about like shows that I've watched, because I have a couple like on my list that I've like Owl House that I'd been like I want to watch that. But like again, to bring it back to the animation thing, animation is a pathway into these conversations and this representation that's so needed. Because when's the last time you saw like a show on CBS or like one of those, you know, I don't know, what are TV channels now? Because I only literally watch Netflix. But, you know, these like large, you know, networks. And they're like, you know, you think about these shows like, I don't know, what are shows? Like CSI? What else is on there? I don't know. But you know what I mean? Like the representation in these live action TV shows that are supposed to depict reality and supposed to depict like everyday life or, you know, whatever, these drama shows. You're not getting that representation there. You're not getting that representation or that, you know, this is normal and like this is, you know, something that we need to normalize. Like you're not getting that. But it's so interesting to me that in these like places that you would seemingly like not necessarily expect to see it, like in these kids shows, you're seeing these like these stories and these voices be heard. And I think it's because it's easier to do. It's easier for people who are, you know, like us and want these voices to be heard and want these stories to be told and know that it's so necessary, that not just people from the LGBTQ community, but also like Black voices, Latinx voices, immigrant voices, things like that being told. It's easier to do that. It's easier to like, it sounds bad, but like trick these like large corporations into telling those stories through animation, because you could be like, oh, it's just a sweet kid show, and then you're gonna be like LGBT, like, you know, like we're gonna sprinkle some of that in.
It's very important for those messages to be in kids shows because, like, you know, especially in the world we live in now, like the media you consume shapes your understanding of the world and your understanding of yourself. And like growing up, the shows like, if it wasn't the shows you watched as a kid, it was the books you read or the music you listened to, and it becomes a part of who you are, and it becomes a part of how you interact with other people and how you understand the world around you. So like to normalize things like a girl having a crush on a girl, or like, you know, whatever, like to normalize things like that in the media that you consume as a kid is really important, because that's going to shape how you think about that stuff for the rest of your life.
When you see it in real life.
Yeah,
because these are things that you would see in real life, like someone living, you know, I saw something recently where it was like a person who was undocumented, and it was, I don't remember if it was animated or not, I'm gonna be honest with you, but you know, that's something that like is prevalent right now, and a kid is gonna hear a million different things about people who are living undocumented. For example, just to use that story and that voice as an example, like kids are going to hear a lot of talking heads about that topic. So if we put that, you know, we humanize that and put that in a character, then that kid is going to not recognize like all of these other adjectives that I will not name here because they're all vile, but they'll recognize that as that story and that voice as a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you won't think about like, you know, oh, maybe my, like, you know,
neighbor.
Like maybe my neighbor says something hateful about this kind of people, but I watch this show where these kind of people are the main characters, and they're all good people, normal people. They're just people like me. So I don't get where the hate comes from. You know, like this idea
what's the character's name from? Right. What's the name of the character again from Steven Universe? I haven't watched it that you guys were talking about. Garnet. Okay,
Garnet.
That's my birthstone.
Ooh.
Hello.
Oh, I forgot our birthdays are like 3 days apart from each other.
I know. That's so crazy. But like, what if like someone like, what if your neighbor was like you can think about it in terms of being like, what if your neighbor was like, yeah, you know, I really just this is because I've heard these things, not because I hold these personal beliefs. But if someone said, you know, I really don't agree with lesbian couples, like I really don't agree with that. I don't agree with that lifestyle, blah, blah, blah. And then that kid absorbs that because kids are sponges and thinks to themselves, well, like Garnet, I love Garnet. She's my favorite character. You know, like I saw that episode, that like tiny seed of like, maybe I shouldn't listen to what all adults tell me, or maybe I should trust myself and my own intuition and my own decision-making skills. Like that's huge. And that's I think what like is the most important. I think if I had to choose like one thing in my opinion that made animation and like storytelling to children like the most important thing in any form, not just animation, but like books and you know, all kinds of stuff, I think that would be it, to like instill some sort of like, you can think for yourself.
Yeah.
And that's why I think like it's so important, like once again reminding you all that this is a library podcast, but that's why I think this is so important to read as a kid, like because part of reading is interpreting a story. And like, you know, I could read, for example, let's take Harry Potter. A lot of people in my age group have read Harry Potter. It came out when we were kids. We all read it growing up. A lot of people younger than me have read Harry Potter, and a lot of people older than me have read Harry Potter. But there are characters that cause a lot of divisiveness because, like, when I read the book, I read this character. I'm talking about Snape. I read this character as being very foul, and I didn't like him. But some people read it and find him very sympathetic and likable. And I think, like, you read the text and you draw your own conclusions, and you gain this skill of like it's you know, you're just reading for fun, but you're still gaining a skill of like critical thinking and, you know, understanding the story and drawing your own conclusions and like being able to have your own opinion on it, and based on what you've read and the information you've been given. It might not match up with everybody's, but it's not wrong and it's not right because you guys all read the same book, you know. So
yeah,
my favorite version of that is when a little kid goes to see a movie that's based on a book, and then the kid is like, excuse me, I saw this character as being this way and the movie didn't have it that way. I'm mad because I thought in my head that they were like this, even though the book did not say it. That's just how I saw it. And then so you got, you know, 9-year-old me at the movie theater going, wait a minute, I thought this character looked or acted or did this, even though the book didn't say so, because that's like the context I read into it, and then the movie didn't have it that way, and so now I'm angry.
Yeah.
Can we just talk about for 1 second the president guy from the Hunger Games and how he did not have a snake mouth? Can we talk about that? He did not have, there was no snake mouth going on there. He had a normal human mouth.
They just totally took away the snake mouth.
They missed an opportunity.
I was looking forward to it. Like, I remember that exact situation. Like, I was that kid, but the book that like that happened to me the most every single time was the Hunger Games series. And also, interestingly, to tie this back into our like main topic, they did use a form of animation to create a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
In the movie The Hunger Games. That was a really interesting example of like that real life but using animation type thing. But yeah, I was so disappointed. There was like I remember like leaning over to my sister and being like, the cat, there was something about the cat, like Buttercup or something like that. There was like some discrepancy with like a scene or something. And I'm like leaning over to my sister and being like, that's not how it happened in the book.
Yeah.
And my sister looked at me like, I hate you. Like, please leave.
In the book,
I only came with you because you were going to buy the candy. Like,
there was a scene in the book where they're getting chased by these giant dogs, right? And it's something about these vicious giant wolf dogs, and they were depicted in the book like wolves. like big, scary-looking wolves. In the movie, they made them look like pit bulls. And I was so mad.
disappointing.
I like there will be like stuff like that in movie. Like sometimes, like I think when you take a book and you make it into a movie, not everything it's always going to be 100% accurate because you just can't. Like they're just totally different mediums, totally different storytelling mediums. It's almost always impossible because there's a lot of things that happen in prose, like that are just all in a character's head. That's them thinking about something that's happening that you can't directly translate to the movie. So you'll have to have something happen to make them, you know, show that or
say that out loud,
you know, whatever.
Yeah.
But like sometimes I'm like, taking this away really kind of messed up something.
Yeah.
Like it, like I felt like that. Like I really enjoyed. I've talked about this to death. I really enjoyed Bird Box, horror novel by Josh Malerman. The movie was so different from the book. Like it was so different. Like they took basically the same basic concept of the monster and like the names of some of the characters, and beyond that, totally different experience watching it. Like totally different story, totally different, like all of this stuff. And I'm like, so much of the story of the book that was scary and effective just evaporates when you change these fundamental parts of it. Like you can change things because the whole point of the movie is that you can't look, or the book is that you can't look at the monster. So of course you're gonna have to change something because movies are a visual medium. But like when you've changed so much that the core like horror of the book is no longer there, then why even?
It's not the same. Yeah, like why even call it that?
Why even call it that? Make something else.
Yeah, you just made a whole new thing and just slapped a name that, like, you basically plagiarized the title. That's what you've done at this point. You just
I've
made a whole new thing, but you just stole a title.
There's been several movies that I felt like that with. Like, why even call it that? Why even call it that book name? Like, that's not even what this is, you know?
Yeah.
Aragon.
Artemis Fowl.
Not to name names. Aragon. Yeah, I heard the new Artemis Fowl wasn't very good.
Ooh.
I have not seen it myself, but I'll have to report back to you. That was from an unreputable source as well. That will also remain nameless, but who I will tell you all later. I'm just kidding.
Ooh.
Spicy.
Anyways, no. It's fine. I just like don't want to be naming names in podcasts of people who don't know that I'm gonna name their name. You know what I mean? It's not scandalous, unfortunately.
Done.
Yeah. But yeah, so Hayden, do you have any other links to share with us?
I think that's about it. The last one I put in there was a GIF of a pencil test from a more modern cartoon. A lot of people really rag on modern cartoons for having really stiff movements, but a lot of them are actually really pretty when it gets down to it, and a lot of them are still hand animated. So that's a gift from Gravity Falls to let you see that it's still animated by hand, some of it, which is really, really cool. I don't know if all of it is. I'd have to look that up.
Oh, yeah.
But I think I love to see the way that when we start these podcasts, we go into it with a topic, and we always wind up talking about something deeper and something important and something else, but that ties in. Like, it always is such a cool gateway to lead us into whatever else it is we're going to talk about. We come up with such good mind boats, guys.
I know, like, the mind boats are so good.
No, I also I think that the way that we come up, it's like a mind map. Now we're in map territory now, you guys. We got our boat.
Oh my God.
Now we're in a map.
We should have started with the map before we got on the boat.
Probably.
Yeah,
so.
I'm a little late. I'm late. We do it backwards around here, all right? But, I do feel like it's interesting how these topics kind of connect. Like today we've talked about, it started off just being about animation and how much, we all like different things, but animation plays a part in all of it. And then it turned into representation and how certain groups of people really need and are getting slowly more representation, which is amazing. And yeah, I mean, I just think that that's so cool. I love talking about that, and I love talking to you guys.
Aw.
These are so much fun.
I love talking to you guys.
So fun. I love it.
I don't know how to accept it.
Me too. I think that the general consensus here is that everybody can relate to some animated content in some way. So whether it's Cinderella from 1950 or Gravity Falls from a few years ago or something completely different, I think that animation carries some weight in your life, even if you're not into it, even if you're like, no, I hate animation. Somehow, somewhere, some piece of animated media influenced your life. And I think that there being representation in it is super important, and there being deep stories in it is super important. And I think that it's such a cool cultural, like pop cultural phenomenon to explore, that it does open up all those other gateways into talking about. I mean, we could go from animation to a modern cartoon that talks about a certain subject to talking about like a dark subject and how to handle it and how to teach kids how to handle it. And I think it's really cool. I think it's cool how impactful it is and how much of how it's such a distinct and important storytelling method.
Absolutely. And we didn't even get into anime. We didn't even get into
we
that
didn't touch
today.
anime with a 10-foot pole. We'll have to, that's a whole nother episode.
That's a whole nother thing. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely. It is something that like it's in everybody's life. You've experienced it in some way. And I really think it's awesome that we got to talk about where animation started and how it started so long ago and how nobody thought it would be a thing. And like, look where we are now. It's like a huge, like giant among, media forms. So that's so awesome. But yeah, I think that if you guys are good, I think that's it for tonight.
Yeah. I think we did good.
Oh, I had something else to add. If you, the listeners, are interested in doing some programming that is based around animation, or if you have a special interest in animation, like shoot us a message on our Facebook page. We have a Facebook page. It's Main Library Level 4. And our Instagram is _teens. That's CALS_teens. And you can send us a direct message and let us know that you want to see some programming for animation, or actually any of the topics that we've talked about in any of our yaks